You guys got the notebooks with the handouts, and you're gonna, every week when you come in, we're gonna add a little bit to those notebooks and stuff for you to fill out, blanks, just to kind of help you follow along and stay with it. But this is basically Apologetics 101. This is learning to sort of answer criticisms against the Christian faith, and learning how to present the Christian faith and really approach it in a way that will help improve our evangelism by being presenting it in a very logical, very rational light. Before we get started, has anyone in here, have you guys ever heard any, lately, have you heard any blatant, really aggressive attacks against the Christian faith lately? I mean, who has ever heard this in the past, few months probably?
Sure, on TV every day.
Yeah. Quite a few people, we hear these happening all the time, and the fact is it's actually becoming a little bit more common. And so this is something that a lot of Christians are getting very interested in, and just sort of with our culture and our society, it's becoming a little more essential to have some sort of understanding of apologetics. Now keep in mind, this is kind of a basic class, and you guys are welcome to ask questions. If at any time you have a question, just raise your hand. You have a basic class and a basic teacher. So if anything is really in-depth, I may just refer you to another source. There are a lot of really good sources out there. But you're welcome to ask questions. And we'll do our best to answer them. But like I said, this is just going to be an introductory level to apologetics. Before we jump in, we'll go over our schedule really quick. Today is going to be the introduction to apologetics. We're going to talk about what apologetics is and worldview and just the basic logic reasoning. And I think that's kind of essential because a lot of times when you think of apologetics, you think defending the Christian faith, arguing with someone, getting in there and fighting with somebody about it. And, that's part of it. That happens. But really, by kind of studying all this today, we're going to get a more holistic approach to what apologetics is and learn how we can understand other people who are not Christians as well, learn the best way to approach them. So we're going to do the introduction. We're going to have arguments next week we're going to do an argument from cosmology. That's an argument for the existence of God. Then the next week we're not going to meet because that's going to be the revival. So we're going to take a week off for the revival. And then we'll come back the next week and talk about the arguments from design, argument from morality. Those are also arguments for God's existence. Then we're going to have a guest speaker. It was hard, but we were finally able to get him nailed down for a date to do that. Are Miracles Possible? By Hunter Bryant. Hunter's going to come and talk with us about that. It's something he's been studying. He's been reading a huge book, a very good book on apologetics lately. And he's going to talk about Are Miracles Possible? Jesus the World Changer it's really a sermon by a guy named Jeff Walling. Very, very good sermon about basically just the impact Jesus has had on the world. I talk about the resurrection of Jesus, the reliability of Scripture, the Bible and archaeology, just because I think that's fun. I enjoy that. I have fun with that. I love archaeology. For number 10, we're going to talk about common objections. And so this is what I want you guys to do. Between now and then, which would be something like 2 months, I want you guys to come to me before or after class or sometime, mention to me if you've heard some sort of major common objection, some reason people have for not wanting to be a Christian. Share that reason with me, and that may be something that we address on that night. We're just going to talk about common things people say to sort of argue against Christianity, and we're going to address those and explain those. And then that may be 1 or 2 weeks, but then we're going to do a review and application, kind of put it all together. Then there was something there I was going to say as well. Okay, well, anyway, some of these arguments are things that maybe you've heard before in sermons or you've seen maybe like a Bible study class. We've talked about them a little bit, but this is going to be a little bit more in-depth on some of these things, and some of it will be things you've heard before, but for the most part, hopefully it's new things. So, let's go into lesson number 1, Intro to Apologetics, Worldview, and Basic Logic. We're covering 3 things tonight, but we'll try to cover them concisely here. By the way, that picture is a guy named Justin Martyr. He was one of the first Christian apologists, and he was one of the first Christian martyrs after the apostles. But he wrote actually defenses of the Christian faith to several government officials at the time that were persecuting Christians to try to explain to them that Christianity was not a threat to the Roman government. They believed that it was, and he tried to explain that it wasn't. Okay. So first off, what is apologetics? Okay? The Greek word for apologetics is apologia, and literally it means a defense. In a court, you would have, basically when someone was on trial, you would have a prosecutor stand up, and they would give a categoria, and that was a prosecution. That was, this is why this person is guilty. And the defense attorney would stand up and say, no, here is my apologia, which is a defense of that. And a lot of people think apologetics, it sounds like apologizing. What are we apologizing for? But it has nothing to do with apologizing. It's giving a defense of the faith. As if Christian faith is on trial, we are defending it from accusation. So it's an argument in support of the Christian faith or defending it against accusations of inaccuracy, irrationality, immorality, etc. If you guys saw the movie God's Not Dead, who saw that movie? A few people in here saw the movie. A lot of people who saw it really liked it. You know, the student goes to school and his teacher is a very avid, rabid atheist and gets up and just really challenges the kid, really gives him a hard time about it. And the kid has to learn to basically defend his faith. He appeals to apologetics. And keep in mind, a lot of this seems like we want to get in, we want to have arguments, we're gonna fight, we're gonna defend the faith. But ultimately, one of the most important aspects of apologetics is we're here to win souls. If we can remove some of those roadblocks that keep people away from Christianity, maybe they can come to know Jesus. A great example of apologetics is in the Bible. A great example is in Acts chapter 17. Paul goes to a city called Athens, and there he talks with a bunch of people in Athens. Anybody remember that story? Who remembers that story? Paul goes to Athens, and it says something very particular about Athens there. Anybody know? The Athenians, they loved to do nothing. They spent all day doing nothing but talking about the latest ideas. It's kind of the intellectual setting. It's kind of like a college campus, you know. They get together and, talk about the latest ideas. We know that this is trending right now, and this is the most popular thing to do. And that's kind of how they thought of things in Athens. And Paul begins to speak about Jesus. And in the process, they invite him to come to this place called the Areopagus. That was basically a big meeting hall. And he went there in order to talk to them and explain to them more about Christianity. And it's interesting, when Paul talks to them about Christianity, he doesn't at all. Normally when he'd go and speak to the Jews, how would Paul argue to the Jews about Christianity? Anybody remember? Very commonly he would argue from something that they had in common, right? What was that thing they had in common? Well, the Paul and the Jews had the common God of the Old Testament. And they agreed with that together. And he would appeal to that, and he would appeal to Old Testament writings and the prophecies and the scriptures and show them this is who Jesus is. Yet when he went and spoke to the people in the Areopagus, that didn't happen. He didn't use that. Instead, he actually cited famous Greek philosophers in order to argue with them. He didn't resort to citing scripture because these people did not share the same appreciation for scripture that he had. And unfortunately, that's becoming sort of the landscape of our culture and our society today. There was a point in time you could go to someone and say, hey, you should do this because the Bible says you should do it. And they'd say, okay, you're probably right, because they respected the Bible. Today, people don't just want to know what the Bible says. They want to know why they should believe it as well. And essentially, that's what we're going to do. We're going to give them a reasonable approach to Scripture and to Christianity. And so really a lot of it depends on our culture, and our culture is changing in such a way that apologetics is really desperately needed. Not apologetics apart from the Bible, but as a complement to biblical teaching. So why do we need apologetics? 3 reasons here. Number 1, the demands of religion are changing. People are more likely to walk away from faith if they have doubts and questions, and those questions are not answered. In fact, actually, a very common occurrence now, sadly, is that many young people, my age and younger, I'm kind of on the older edge of it, but really my age and younger, are walking away from their faith, and they are taking on an atheistic worldview. They're claiming that there is no God. And some studies have been done, and they kind of do some case studies and see what happens there. And a very common thread that runs through that is you have a young person who is very involved, very devoted to their church, Very often it is an ultra-fundamentalist church. And fundamentalist can mean one of two things. I mean the bad sense of fundamentalist, the extremely rigid, not willing to really think or even consider anything else, won't even think about anything outside of their very specific planned worldview. These children, these young people are oftentimes, they grow up in those churches, and they have someone they really admire and look up to, a minister or a youth leader or a Sunday school teacher or even a parent. They look at them as kind of a spiritual leader. And then when these people have questions or doubts about their faith, they go and ask this person, and unfortunately, they are put off. Sometimes they're even chastised for asking. They're told, you're not supposed to ask questions like that. Don't doubt, just believe, just have more faith. And these people have an intellectual hunger, and it's not being fed. And very frequently, that's what starts off young people down a path of atheism, because they have these questions that apologetics can answer, but it's just completely thrown out the window. But reason number 2, the view of truth is changing. You guys may have seen this yourself. There was a point in time where people made decisions about something based on what seemed to be the most reasonable and rational course of action. But now, people are more likely to make a decision based on an emotional judgment. I have a friend who from college who has walked away from his faith. I was talking with him a few weeks ago about it, and I kept questioning him, trying to figure out why he did this, why he walked away from his faith. And the one common thread that went through all, he kept saying this over and over again, basically it was the effect of, Christianity didn't agree with him. It wasn't a matter of whether he agreed with it or not. Christianity didn't agree with him. He had his own view of how he wanted things. He felt it should be a certain way. And where Christianity didn't line up, he had issues. So he wasn't looking at the facts and saying, this must be true. He's looking at his feelings and saying, okay, what matches my feelings the best? And unfortunately, that's how a lot of people in a postmodern society assess what is true. And reason number 3, the nature of skepticism is changing. If you guys haven't noticed, it's been over the past 12, 13 years now, people who were skeptical of the Christian faith have become very aggressive. I mean, just rabid against it. They want to destroy it if they can. And, we kind of wonder why that happens. A lot of people say it goes back to 9/11, because when Islamic extremists crashed planes into the Twin Towers, a lot of people looked at that and said, look at what this crazy, unbridled religion can do. And as a result, they criticized Christianity, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Some Muslim extremists do something crazy, so everybody turns on Christianity. It doesn't make sense. But that's one of the factors that really set it off, is people began to become afraid of sort of a very devoted religious view, even if it's not the one that did that. But skepticism is changing, and people need to have a way to be able to answer that. Let's do some quick statistics about it real quick. A survey by Barna showed that 70 to 75% of Christian youth walk away from the church after high school. That's an enormous number. Think about it. If our youth group is something like 4 people right now, 3 of them would be out of the church after they left school, after high school. That's enormous. Now, a lot of them do come back, but while they're gone, they're making bad decisions, and some of them don't ever come back. Christian youth in America are not being taught to cross-examine the skeptical and atheistic views they encounter when they leave home. When kids go off to college, they encounter a lot of very anti-Christian views, and it's all one-sided. They're not taught to look at the other side of the evidence. More than half of all college professors view evangelical Christian students unfavorably. You remember the movie God's Not Dead, like we talked about? That's the premise of that movie, and that happens a lot.
Why do we keep hiring such college professors?
I'm not the one hiring them. I don't know. It's sort of becoming a trend in higher education, and that kind of actually goes back. I would argue maybe that goes back actually to Darwinism. Christianity pulled out of education when Darwinism came up, and we didn't answer those claims. We pulled away from it instead. And so secular thought has really kind of overtaken a lot of our higher education since then. But college professors are 5 times more likely to consider themselves atheists. And a lot of Christian students are going to schools and they're encountering that and they have no idea how to approach it. And that's why apologetics is so important. The next slide, this picture just kind of shows you what we're talking about. People see they have these questions and these doubts already blocking them from getting to Christianity. And on the same side, all the rest of culture is kind of leaning off towards all these other approaches, Buddhism, Darwinism, Marxism, agnosticism, all these different views are going off, culture is kind of going off in this direction, and yet there's all these roadblocks, and so it makes it very difficult for a young person to really stay on the path of their faith when all this is working against them. And that's why it's important that Christians have an understanding of that. You can go ahead and change 2 slides, dear. I'm going to skip that. All right. Any questions about apologetics at all? About what it is or anything? Okay. Let's go on to worldview. A worldview is basically a philosophy of life or conception of the world. Worldview is like a lens, and you look through that lens, and that lens colors everything that you see. And so when you look at something through a certain worldview, it will affect how you interpret things. 2 people can look at the same thing and come to different conclusions. We don't always like to say that or talk about that, but the fact is, if you have a completely different past from someone else, the same answer is not going to come to mind for everyone exactly the same. Let me give you an example. Show you a picture here. These 2 guys here are looking at this picture. Now, somebody please describe for me, in your own words, one of you guys, what do you see in that picture? That picture at the top. Don't just give me a technical answer. I mean, reach in, give me your heart and your soul about this. What do you see there?
A shabby kitten.
Okay, Charles sees a shabby kitten. Anybody see anything different than that? A sweet, what now? Sweet and lovable kitten. I think I heard cuddly back there somewhere. Okay. It's got, okay, oh, that's a very good assessment. Maybe Janie's afraid of the cat a little bit.
Also got 2 stick men.
We got 2 stick men, but they come in here in a second. Now, that's funny because you've got the same picture, and yet you got completely different things coming up. You see, one person sees a shabby old cat, the other sees an adorable ball of fuzz. Now, look at these 2 guys. What they say here. Now, that's an error right there. That's not supposed to be going off to the side. One says it's a cute kitten. The other says it's a dangerous animal. Why in the world would they look at the same thing and say 2 different things? Let me tell you why? One's a man and one's a woman. Well... The worldview. The guy on the right was bitten by a cat when he was 8 years old and had to contracted rabies and had to go to the hospital to have his rabies taken care of. He's looking at that cat a little bit different than other people are, right? Your worldview is going to affect how you see things. So, with that said about worldview, let's talk about 2 different types of apologetics. Okay? There is evidential apologetics and presuppositional. Now, there's more than that, but these are the 2 basic types we're going to cover. First off, evidential apologetics. That is defending the faith by highlighting pieces of evidence. Evidential evidence kind of sounds like it. Give you an example, the fossil record. A person looks at the fossil record, and they see all these different fossils in certain orders laid up under this, and a lot of Christians look at that and say, this looks like there was a worldwide flood that deposited these sedimentary layers and covered it over. Then again, there are some people, even some Christians, who look at that. They look at the same thing, the same evidence, and they say, well, this looks like millions of years of deposits of sedimentary layers. They disagree there. There's evidence, and we look at the same evidence, we can come to different conclusions. Now, evidential apologetics is important. It has a role, but the fault is if you have different worldviews, you're going to interpret it differently. A great example of this is Acts chapter 14. Paul and Barnabas go to a city called Lystra. And while they're in Lystra, there is a sick guy there. They heal a guy. And does anybody remember this story? Something crazy happens. They're trying to preach Christ. They heal a guy there who needs it. And everyone reacts in a crazy way. Now, in Paul's mind, what's he thinking? If he heals somebody, what are they going to think? He's thinking they're going to believe what? They're going to believe in God. They're going to believe the message that he's presenting. He's been talking about Jesus. They're going to believe in Jesus. But that's actually not what they do. When they see Paul heal a guy, they immediately start saying, these are the gods Zeus and Hermes. Or maybe it's Jupiter. I think it's Zeus and Hermes. Yes, the Greek names. These are the gods Zeus and Hermes. Well, that's because all these people that they're around are pagans. And they believed that there was actually a myth in their culture that Zeus and Hermes went to their city a long time ago. And so what they see, they interpret it in light of a different view. So evidential apologetics is important, but first you have to lay the groundwork with presuppositional apologetics. And presuppositional apologetics is this: it's tearing down irrational worldviews and building a solid one in its place. So sometimes before you can address the evidence, you have to address the worldview that lays under the evidence. Because if a person has a worldview that claims that, there is no God, then telling them Jesus rose from the dead doesn't mean anything. First off, you have to show them there is a God. There can be a God. You have to address that worldview first. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, there's a lot of crazy worldviews kind of floating around now, and not all worldviews are created equal. There are several that are not very good, and you hear them a lot today, but we'll talk about a few self-contradictory worldviews, just to give you an example, kind of what presuppositional apologetics are. You're working from their presuppositions. There is a sort of a relativist worldview. Anybody know what relativism is? You heard anyone say this before? People claim there's no absolute truth. Who's heard that before? Okay. What do you say if somebody says that to you? What can you say to them? There's one question you can ask them that's going to completely tear down their worldview. Anybody know what it is? You can ask them, is that absolutely true? Well, it can't be absolutely true, because if there's no absolute truth, then the statement you make about there being no absolute truth can be absolutely true. So it's not possible. Okay, that's a self-contradictory worldview. It falls on its own sword. It doesn't work. There are people out there who believe that. Before you can tell someone about Christ who believes that, first off, you have to convince them that their worldview is flawed, and you have to show them a right worldview. And that's part of what we're going to be learning to do. There's another one. Materialism is another popular one today. Materialism basically says the only things that exist are the material world. Okay, what would you say to somebody who said that? Tell you what I would say. I would say, ask them, is that statement a material thing? Because they're making a statement of philosophy, a statement of belief, a metaphysical reality, and yet they're claiming that there's nothing but the physical. All right, there's a really common one today, one more. There's a very common one today that you're very likely to encounter. It's called scientism. People say the only things that we can know are things that can be scientifically proven. You ever heard anyone say that? What do you say to somebody who says that? You're all looking at the screen waiting for the answer, aren't you? What's that? How do you prove science? That's a good one. Well, how can you prove that's scientifically true? You can say, is that scientifically proven? Is it scientifically proven that the only things we can know can be scientifically proven? That's not a statement of science. That's a statement of philosophy. And even if it were, you'd be using science to prove science. That's circular reasoning. There are a lot of beliefs going around that don't make sense. And if you want to be able to get somebody to a place where they can hear about Christ, you need to address those worldviews that are underneath. Okay, with that said, let's break down our schedule really quick and kind of give you an example of what they are. The argument from cosmology, design, and morality, those are all presuppositional. As far as the miracles, are miracles possible? I'm guessing Hunter's going to go more presuppositional with that, but I don't know. We're building that reality. Is there a God? Can we really trust that there's a God? We're building that basic groundwork first, and then later on we're coming on to the evidential. Jesus the world changer, the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. You got to believe in God to believe that Jesus rose from the dead. And if we can convince somebody that God exists, well, it's perfectly plausible that he could raise somebody from the dead. Okay. Any questions or anything at all about that, about worldview or apologetics so far? Okay. Really quick, we're going to do basic logic. Has anyone in here ever had a class in logic before? Schools used to teach logic a lot more. You had one? Programming logic. It's similar. There'll be connections in that, I'm guessing. But I don't know. I've never had programming logic. There was a point in time where logic was just a natural part of education. You had to teach kids logic because you were teaching them to think and to figure things out. We don't really teach that as much anymore, and that's kind of a fault. Basically, a logical argument is going to consist of two or more premises that are supposed to be true statements, and those premises are supposed to add up to a conclusion. And if the premises are true, and if they logically connect to the conclusion, then the conclusion absolutely, positively has to be true, no questions asked. Okay? So both of those things, the premises have to be true, and the logic connecting them has to be true. Anybody know why I put up a picture of Spock? Make connections. Spock was logical. The Vulcan race was not logical in Star Trek. This is a side note. This is not related. I'm proud of my older brother. He took a trivia quiz. He placed number 2 in the state of Alabama in Star Trek trivia. There's only one person in the entire state who knows more about Star Trek than my older brother. I thought that was interesting. I'm proud of him. Anyway, that's not connected though. Let's do a few examples of a logical...
Your brother is smart?
My brother is a pretty smart guy, yes. He's very smart. Let's do a couple of examples of logical arguments. I'm going to give you guys an argument in this format, and you're going to tell me if it's true or not. Okay? Premise number 1, all cars have 4 wheels. Premise number 2, this is a car. That thing right there. So, conclusion is, that has 4 wheels. Correct? 5 wheels. What, are you talking about steering wheel? What about, or? And there's a flywheel too, don't forget about that, if that counts. So there's 7. No, but all cars have some number of wheels, correct? And that is a car. So it's a safe assumption that has wheels, and that's a dark picture, so it's hard to see, but it has wheels. Is that true? Okay, true, good logic. Let's do another one. Most dogs have 4 legs. The reason I say most is I know there's a 3-legged dog that runs around in our area here, okay? But most dogs have 4 legs. That animal has 4 legs, therefore that animal is a dog. True? What is wrong? That's a cat. Oh, it's a cow. I thought you said it's a cat. I thought you were being funny. Okay. Well, look, premise 1. Most dogs have 4 legs. Is that true? Okay, well, premise 2. That has 4 legs, right?
Yes.
So why isn't that a dog? Because it's a cow.
No, lots of things have 4 legs.
Exactly. That's not an exclusion. It doesn't say only dogs have 4 legs. It says dogs have 4 legs. It's possible there's such a thing called a cow that has 4 legs as well. So in that case, the premises are true, but they don't logically add up. They don't connect in the right way. All right, one more. Everything with 4 legs is living. This has 4 legs. That's a table, by the way. Therefore, that is living. True. What's wrong with this one? The first premise is incorrect. Not everything with 4 legs is living. Tables can have 4 legs and they're not alive. Okay. So you have to have true premises and it has to add up logically. And that's how a logical argument tends to flow. Now, at the end of your notebook that I handed out, I have a 2-page handout in there on common logical fallacies. These are things people try to use kind of in place of logic that don't work out. We're not going to go over those just for time's sake. It'll be kind of long and wordy. But if you look over those and you have questions, you're welcome to ask me. Ask me next week, or you can call me up this week. Nothing big is going on this week. Nothing really huge. I got lots of free time, so. But if I don't answer, I'm holding my wife's hand while she's having a baby. So. All right. Those are common logical fallacies. You can look over those at your own convenience. Try to give an example of each one, and most of what you hear in there are examples I've actually heard from people. And it's kind of silly, some people think that, but those are logical fallacies. They negate a logical argument. It means it's not really logical. Okay. Now, any questions on any of that so far? I've just got a couple more quick things to go over. Is that no questions at all so far? Okay. Let me give you a few words of warning. I started studying apologetics probably about really in a devoted way about 3 years ago. And there are several things I wish I had known before I began studying apologetics. And these are some warnings I'll give you. First off, keep in mind that most skepticism is not intellectually driven. My friend I told you about, who walked away from his faith and because he had some disagreements with Christianity, when I was talking with him, he kept giving me reasons, intellectual reasons, he didn't agree with Christianity. It doesn't intellectually work in such and such and such area. He kept giving me those, but ultimately I know him and I know his situation and I know what the issue was. The real issue was my friend wants to live a lifestyle that's not consistent with Christianity. And he knows that. He knows it doesn't work out. And so, he walked away for that reason, but he kind of puts up this barrier of intellectualism. Well, it doesn't intellectually work. He claims it doesn't intellectually work out, but that's not always the case. So keep in mind, a lot of people will claim they won't be Christians for intellectual reasons, but a lot of the time, sometimes that's true, but a lot of the time, the real issue is something else. It's an emotional reason. It's a lifestyle reason, something like that. Number 2, half the battle is winning an audience, not an argument. Before you can ever convince anyone of anything, they have to be willing to listen to you. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the hardest part. Answering their objections and giving what we're talking about here in this class is easy. The hard part is really getting close to the person, getting them to trust you so you can talk with them. I knew an atheist girl one time. We were friends on Facebook, and she had some real emotional issues with Christian faith. Like a lot of people, she kind of just said, well, intellectually she claimed that she couldn't accept it for intellectual reasons. But it became, I tried to even talk with her about those intellectual reasons, but the problem was I could never have a conversation. As soon as I interjected any sort of reason or rationality into the discussion, she would retreat back and go emotional. She would claim that she couldn't be a Christian because Christians hurt her feelings. Now, how rational is that? Yeah, her feelings were really hurt, but that's not necessarily a rational reason to reject Christianity. And that was a really frustrating thing, because I was kind of thinking, as long as you can provide a rational argument, people are going to believe you and become Christians, and that's not the way it is. Sometimes they have emotional issues, and the hardest part is getting them to listen. Some skeptics won't listen no matter how rational you are. The reference there is Pharisees and Jesus. Did Jesus ever give any evidence at all that he was from God and that he was the Son of God? What kind of evidence did Jesus give? Maybe occasionally, once or twice in his ministry? What kind of things were evidence that Jesus was from God? His miracles. And you know what? Jesus performed miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle. The evidence that Jesus was the Son of God was outstanding. The things he did, people should have believed that he is whoever he said he was, because Jesus gave lots of evidence. That didn't convince the Pharisees. A lot of people still opposed him. And again, it wasn't intellectual. They were just upset. That was a big problem when I first started studying apologetics. I was getting all these answers to these difficult questions, and I was thinking, wow, I can convince anyone of anything. Not really true, though. You have to know. You have to win them to yourself first. That's why I give this piece of advice. When reason doesn't work, resort to the 5th gospel. What's the 5th gospel? It's in your notebook. Anybody read that yet? Our example, yeah. The saying is that there are 5 testaments to Jesus' life: Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and the Christian life. And a lot of people will never read those first 4. Some people, their biggest exposure to Jesus is going to be how they see you living your life. That's how people are going to, that's what's going to be a major factor in influencing whether or not people believe what you say and believe the truth about Christ. And so sometimes people won't talk with you about the intellectual stuff. They'll keep it at a superficial level. They'll stay emotional. They'll keep it arm's length. But hopefully, if you can live such an exemplary life for Christ, maybe they'll start to listen. Maybe they'll eventually soften up and begin to listen to you. And there's only one more thing I want to share with you guys. A question of whether or not to answer. When someone is really critical of the Christian faith, there are some people that you could spend the next 20 years of your life answering every question they have, and they're not going to listen to what you say. There are some people that they claim it's intellectual, it's not really, and so to really, to try and get them to listen is really kind of a waste of time. So the question is, do you answer somebody or do you not? Jesus did not answer every single critic. Sometimes it was better to not even give them credibility. In Luke 20, right there, some Pharisees come to Jesus, and they ask him, by what authority does he do the things that he does? And he says, I'll tell you what, I'll ask you a question. By what authority did John the Baptist do what he did? And they didn't want to say one or the other. If they said, it was by God's authority. Well, John the Baptist testified to Jesus. They're admitting that Jesus is the Son of God. But then again, if they say it was by his own authority, people were going to get mad at them because everybody loved John the Baptist at the time. And so they said, we don't know. And Jesus said, fine, I'm not going to give you an answer either. You see, it's better sometimes to not give them credibility, not even waste your time answering some people, but sometimes you have to. So, when you are in a position like that, when you hear criticism, when do you answer and when do you not answer? Consider a few things. Is the criticism sincere or just venting anger? Are they really curious? Are they really think this is a big fault in Christianity? Or are they just mad and ranting? If they're ranting, how much good are you going to do anyway? Will the answer help or will it have no effect? There are some people you can answer, it doesn't do any good. And some people maybe it will help, and you have to consider that. Is this the first answer, or are we rehashing old arguments? Is this something they really want to know, or are we just going over the same thing? We just spinning our tires in the mud? Is a criticism reasonable or unreasonable? There are some people out there that will say some really dumb stuff. And any person with any shred of rationality in their being will know it's dumb. They're just desperate to say something. Sometimes it's better not to waste your time with those people. Now, sometimes they're really good. Sometimes they can really cause problems for other people, and you need to answer them. This is a big one. Does it hurt others? Maybe this guy over here is saying something critical, and it's dumb, and it's not worth wasting my time on, and no matter what I say, he's not going to listen. I could just walk away, but then again, maybe there's somebody here who's hearing him. And if he hears a criticism, and he hears no response, he may think, well, the Christians don't have a response. So maybe, even if it's not for the person making the critique, maybe it's good for the bystanders for him to have an answer. Finally, am I responding in anger or objectively? Because that's going to have a big impact on how effective you are in speaking with anyone on anything. Okay. Like I said, that's kind of a basic overview of apologetics. Are there any questions or anything we have? Like I said, if you guys have heard any common objections or major objections, talk to me about them sometime, and we may talk about them in class and actually bring them up. And those would be the things you hear people say sometimes are the best things to bring up because you hear a lot of people say them. And we'll answer those on week 10 and possibly week 11 of this lecture. But no questions? Okay. Everybody understand? Good? All right. Thank you guys for coming.